So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our third webinar of this Check Your Game series, which was initiated by Pro Helvetia and executed by the Swiss Game Developers Association. We have had two webinars so far. The first one was by Florian Jenal, introducing you to the art of pitching, and then followed by Jeremy Spielmann. He was talking about marketing and financing, which was very dense presentation and hopefully helped you already a little bit to further develop your project. And today I'm very glad to have Alice Ruppert with us. She will speak to us to another very important aspect of game development and also afterwards the process of contacting and getting in touch and staying in touch with the gamers. She speaks about community and platforms. And well, I don't want to speak too much. The floor is yours, Alice. Welcome and please present your knowledge with us, to us.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining today. Right, so I have only one screen, so I'm going to be tabbing out. So if you want to if you have any questions, I do not see any raised hands, so you'll have to just talk and I'll hear you. Which, by the way, is fine. I'll try to open up the floor for questions in between. So if there's anything you don't understand or if there's anything that's confusing to you, do feel free to interrupt. I'm perfectly fine if it's yeah, this is supposed to be useful to you. So if it's not, feel free to yeah, let me know if you're struggling with something. Right. So quick overview of what I'm planning to talk about today. I want to basically just give you a few outlines of why, what is community management or community building in games? Why do we build communities? Differentiate between community platforms and marketing channels. Defining purposes. What does that mean, and how is it implemented? Perhaps also provide some arguments regarding when you don't need a community. Then I'm going to briefly go into some what are rules for a community, or what makes sense in terms of how you manage and moderate. Some do's and don'ts that I've learned over time, and some arguments for which platforms to choose. I'm gonna talk a bit about how to grow communities, though that bit is a bit. I'm keeping that as a bit short because it has a lot of overlap to general marketing, and just the topic of how to reach people is, of course, how to reach people with your game is a whole topic by itself. And I have a few resources for further reading that I highly recommend at the end. All right, so maybe just as a real quick before we begin, does any one of you have experience with community management? Has anyone tried to, for example, build a Discord server for your games, or anything like that? Have you had any interactions with players, perhaps outside of just meeting people in person? I assume most of you have experience with play testing in person and at events, but has anyone done anything before in terms of trying to grow a dedicated space online for players of your game, or for any other thing for that matter?
That's been my job since October for another company, so not for my personal game. I've been in charge for all their social medias, which includes a Discord server.
Okay, cool. All right, that's nice. Then I hope there's not too much stuff in here you already know, but I hope it will be useful nonetheless, and perhaps more directly applicable in some cases. Nice. All right, then I assume the others, that's a no for the others, that it's something you haven't made experiences with. Okay, good. Just a bit of context for me, so I know where to begin, basically. All right. Why do we build communities? I think actually, let's. I think the answer to that is relatively simple. So let me open up the space for like, what do you think? Why do we build communities? It's a handful of straightforward answers, and I'd like to summarize them. So who has an idea? Why do we do that?
So you have like a way to communicate what you're working on?
Yes, that's one thing. That's a bit of an overlap with like marketing channels, but I'll get to that distinction later on. Yeah, to communicate what you're working on.
To get more traction.
Again, that's not, maybe I should have differentiated between the marketing channels earlier on. Like these are aspects of like general like marketing. Like why do we want to reach player? Yes, or why do we want to reach players? Communities, stuff like Discord servers, message boards, etc., are more also about players talking to us, and that is sort of like a relevant distinction. But I'll just let you know what I had in mind here for these. So one of the core aspects of like, why do we build communities? Why do we also like gather players around us and not just talk at them through social media channels is because it's a two-way street. So because we can gather feedback from players, because we can ask them what they think of features, we can gather reports of stuff that isn't working as well. So that can be like basic questions such as, what do you think of the game? But also, more specific stuff like bug reports or stuff like that. So gathering feedback is for that, you basically need a community, because the alternative is that you only get it you only get that feedback on the one hand through established like review platforms such as Steam, or on the other hand, like through like a support email or something. But it's a lot easier to gather feedback if people have a place to hang out and talk about your game. It's also super useful to conduct polls among players. This isn't exactly the same as like A/B testing. Of course, like if you can also do data-driven analysis of your players. That's something that becomes especially relevant if you work in mobile games. But some game analytics help every sort of game, of course. But sometimes it's hard. You can't analyze everything in advance, and sometimes it's really useful to also ask your players what they want in advance. For example, if I have an existing community for my game, but I'm considering which feature to tackle first, I can make players feel heard, like give them the feeling that they're influencing the development, and also maybe decide my priorities. Like if I want to add on, like if it's more important right now to add a new level, or if it's more important right now to add 3 new outfits or something like that. Like it can help set priorities. Which features prioritize next? Which of these things do you like more in the game? Because that's also that can also let us give us insights regarding what else players would like. Like I said, these things are, this sort of feedback gathering happens in combination with actual analytics, because of course your community is only a subset of your players, but it can still be very useful. And another aspect of like community is that you can create ambassadors. What that means is, of all the people you reach on your social media, on your with all your marketing efforts, there's a lot of people who are just passively listening. Like most of the people will just be passively listening. The good thing about a community where people sort of also engage with you and not just listen to what you're saying every once in a while, but sort of feel like they're part of something, feel like they're part of not part of the development, but just like included and asked along the way. It creates a whole different sort of loyalty, and that's what we mean usually by ambassadors. An ambassador is something who doesn't just play your game, but also tells other people about it. And maybe when they tell other people about it, they have more reasons than just, oh, this is a cool game. They might be able to like speak a bit more about like how the game works, why it works the way it does, what the company behind it is doing. So like you can basically create players who will further market the game for you. That's the idea behind having ambassadors. Yeah, exactly. People who take extra interest and promote it. And of course, it can help you get to know your audience. That can be particularly relevant if your audience is anything more specific and not just like if it's gamers between 20 and 25, you might have already like you might already know pretty well what your target audience wants, but it's especially if you're like if you have, for example, a target age group that's a bit further away from your own, or if it's a specific niche interest. Like, I mean, my prime example, of course, is because I work on games with horses in them, so I build communities of people who have a lot of experience with horses and with like what they want to see represented in, like which equestrian things they want to see represented in games. That can, of course, like that can help. That can be a hugely important resource. It can also be like you can use a community for research if it's about a specific, like if your game focuses on a specific topic, or you can just get to know like what kind of person plays your game, and that can help in turn. Yeah, also, what else do they play? It also helps you know your competition if your community informs you of like what else they play. These are all a bit the list I have here is not super quantifiable, but it is, all of those are aspects that like come together to just give you a more holistic picture of who plays your game and why and what they want. Now, here's the distinction that I mentioned before. So when I talk about communities, I specifically mean places where your audience can talk to you, and not just one way. It's never just the audience talking to you. It's always you talking to the audience and them talking to you. But that's how I differentiate it from marketing channels, which are things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, like a Facebook page, Instagram, TikTok, where you are the only one actively posting, and users can comment. So that can be used for Facebook for feedback. Sorry, for feedback as well. But the nature of these platforms and the expectation that people have about it is quite different. So examples that I have here of like what are really communities are Discord servers, subreddits, message boards, so like traditional forums, or Facebook groups, whereas Facebook pages are more of a traditional marketing channel. So Facebook is on both sides here. Doesn't mean you need both, of course, but we'll get to what makes you choose a channel later on. So yeah, like I said, marketing channels are where you talk to your audience, and community is where your audience talks to you. Even though it's not strictly separated, a bit of both happens in both, but primarily the focus is there. One important thing to consider is the second to last point here, that most marketing channels don't require as much moderation when you're not actively posting. And even then, like, you do cultivate the following and the comment section, and you also want to moderate your comment sections, but a community, like moderating a community, is a lot more crucial, because the way people talk there, the way people talk about your game, the topics they discuss otherwise, the way they treat each other, all of that reflects on your game. And sometimes people are active at points where you maybe didn't have an update planned, but you have a community, so people have a channel to talk to you. So like a community, basically, like once you have a bit of activity built up, it will need moderation at all times. If your Discord server has 50 people, that's probably not they won't be talking to each other the whole time. But as soon as you have a certain critical mass of people, like maybe a few hundred, you can quickly like that quickly becomes a thing that just always needs eyes on. That doesn't mean you need to be online 24/7, but it does help a lot if you have like a few people keeping eyes on it, which like which usually means adding moderators from the community. Okay, so that's the distinction between community and marketing channels. Is that is that clear? Does that make sense, or are there any questions about this distinction? All right, then I'll move on. Right. So, like I mentioned, there are cases where you don't need a community, or rather, where maybe a community isn't your primary or like your first priority. In these cases, it doesn't mean that I think you gain nothing from a community, but just these are some considerations to make before deciding how heavily you want to invest in building a community. Because it's never as simple as just, oh yeah, we have a Discord or a Reddit or a message board or whatever. It requires work. It requires maintenance. It requires moderation. And basically, when you do that, you should do it with the awareness that it will consume time and therefore money. Like, this is part of your marketing budget, so to say, even if your budget is just your own time. So game suitability is one consideration. Community building is generally good for games with regular updates or games that you play repeatedly. So like anything that players have something to discuss, players need something to discuss regularly. It doesn't, very, very broadly speaking, it doesn't make a ton of sense to build a community dedicated to discussing one 2-hour-long narrative game. That's not usually where you see communities really flourish. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean that there's nothing to be gained. There's also studios who build communities like based on their studios rather than their games in order to sort of mitigate that. But just consider before starting a community, like, is your game suited for it? Will people have something to discuss regularly? Will there be will there be updates, or will it just be or do we just want people to have a place where they say, I just played the game, I'm done now, I loved it? Like, that's not usually the that might not be worth it in that case if it's just for that. There's also consideration of maybe your community was relevant, but it's not anymore. So like, what if you use the community for play testing, building up to a release? It might no longer be relevant at some point. Maybe you had an alpha playtester community, but now it's not so relevant anymore. My advice for that is that you close communities instead of abandoning them. Like, if you realize that you don't need this space so much anymore, trust me, it is much better to just close it down and let it die a dignified death instead of letting it leaving it open and just risking that the only engagement you get every month is a few new spam bots or anything like that. Because the communities that nobody maintains still have a chance to either to attract toxic members, to attract spam bots, to attract any sort of thing you don't want there. And the less active your community is, the more negative. Like, if you don't have anybody posting positive things, you don't want them posting spam or anything like that either. So just close things if you no longer need them. We had to make a quick example. I did community building for a mobile game called Wild Shade 2 years ago, and there we were kind of hesitant to, or the team behind the game was a bit hesitant to close the community because they were like, it wasn't so much that they wanted to keep it open. It was just that nobody really told me, their community manager, to okay, this is how the game changes now. We don't have further updates. So I had to actively go to them and be like, do you have further updates for this game? Because if not, I am not moderating this Discord anymore. It's it doesn't make sense to keep it open simply to give people a place to chat. That's not a good reason to keep a community open. You need or at least not to pay someone to keep it open. It's don't just let that slide. Draw a clear line and make a clean break. Exactly, closed communities, if they fulfill their purpose and no longer have one. You also don't need a community for one-way marketing. If all you want is to talk to your players, but you don't need feedback, you don't need anything coming back from the community, then you might be better served with the regular like marketing channels. We suddenly started having a bunch of noise. Can everyone hear that, or is it just me?
That must have been me, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, yeah, that was that. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. If you're not interested in receiving input, just don't open a Discord server. Just make a Twitter or TikTok or anything instead, where you only need to moderate comments and where you don't constantly have like where you don't ask players to participate as much. Right. So I've talked a few, like I've mentioned a few times, like that you need a purpose for a community, or like because I mentioned earlier, like that you should close your community once it's fulfilled its purpose. So then, what is the purpose of a community? Like what can be a purpose? We've already established some general ways in which a community is useful, like getting to know the audience, talking to players, getting feedback, etc. But I've noticed in my time building up the horse game communities that I'm working, or that I'm managing, but also the wild shade community that I've built up, that it really helps to have a very strict purpose for what your community is for and also what it is not. That can be things like, I want people to give beta feedback while I'm running this playtest. This would also imply that once your game is released, you no longer need that server. So either it needs a new purpose or it needs to be closed. It's a place for players to talk about the game, but in that case, it's like, okay, do you also allow discussion of things other than the game? Maybe, maybe not. So like just keep your server, or like keep your community to that purpose then. It can also be a way to get to know the developers and chat to them, in which case you also want to be active yourself on the server, of course. I keep saying server, sorry. Discord is sort of the one of the most prominent community building tools today. But these things generally apply to Discord servers as well as the other community channels I've mentioned. So yeah, I found it super helpful to like have an actual list of goals. What is this community for? And not just reaching people, because for that I could, like I said, for that I could also just use traditional marketing channels. Of course it helps. Of course it helps me with my reach, but I need to be aware of what do I want from my community when I open such a communication space where they can talk to me. And also unique goals for what it is not. This is like, as a bit of background, this mostly comes up whenever, for example, players ask like, oh, can we get a channel for this or that? Like if it's a Discord server, or maybe it's a message board, and they ask like, oh, can we get a thread on that, or can we get a forum on that? And we have a tendency to say like, oh yeah, these people want to talk about that. Yeah, let's let them. But remember that every increased volume, like every additional volume that you get, every additional topic you let your community cover is something that you need to moderate. So you have to be sort of business-like in this approach of like, what should we add channels for, or what should we allow discussion of in our community? Because yeah, the more it is, the more you need to moderate and like have an overview of. So it doesn't come at no cost. Opening additional channels in a server is like, the creation is an effort of 2 seconds, but every additional channel you create adds to your moderation volume. Exactly. You choose what to host. This is your space. If somebody says, but I would want a server for this game where I can talk in French to my fellow French game players, then it's like, that's nice. I can't offer that. Please create your own fan server. So like, don't hesitate to also tell people to just create their own communities if yours doesn't serve that. I mean, that's just one example. Maybe you're also fine with having different language channels, but you just need to be aware of what you want to include and what not. You're responsible for who feels welcome in your space. That's also going to be, I'll pick that up later when we talk about rules. But it's a matter of like, what sort of audience do you want to cultivate? Who do you encourage to be there, and who you don't? So that's like, if people come in and, for example, voice bigoted opinions about others of your players, it's up to you. Like, do you want to let that stand? Who will feel welcome if you do let that stand? Who will no longer feel welcome? Like, it's you cultivate who you allow and who you like, what sort of attitude you encourage. Yeah, and create clear rules that help your community stick to its purpose. So like, if you, for example, you might need rules against off-topic posts, or define exactly what is on topic and what isn't, and also make it clear, like, this community is intended for this and that. If you have other discussion needs, please take it elsewhere. Like, making all of that explicit can really help. It sounds kind of basic, but that's sort of one of my learnings, is that a lot of these community management learnings sound incredibly intuitive and incredibly basic after you've done them wrong a few times, and after you, for example, had a dozen people ask, oh, but can we get channels for this, and that? Like, it really helps to keep those purposes strict, and to keep the scope contained. And it sounds kind of obvious, but it's something I keep having to remind people who build communities and who are like, oh yeah, let's do that. Like, no, let's stick to what we set out to do. Right. Sorry, were there questions on that? Let me just quickly check in if there's anything that's unclear about what I've said so far. All right, in that case, let's move on. So, community rules. It's kind of, I think it's kind of obvious that communities need rules, because unmoderated spaces tend to get toxic really quick. So like, if somebody is rude to other players, insults other players, or insults you, you want to have rules as a basis to tell them that's not okay. And often like, community rules also grow with the community. So like, for example, maybe at the beginning it's enough to say, be kind to each other, or like have a general rule like, don't be a dick. But the thing is that often such vagueness then leads to people exploiting that, or like not following the letter of your rule but not the spirit. And so it can help to be very specific. Yeah, so what we want to enforce is kindness, civility, and inclusivity. To me, that usually means that I explicitly say racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia are not allowed in this community, because it creates a certain expectations that, like, it creates, on the one hand, it creates a certain expectations for players who care about these values, like, oh, okay, I'm safe here. And on the other hand, it discourages people from just assuming that, oh yeah, I'm kind, of course. Like, somebody coming into your community aiming to spread any sort of bigotry is going to think they're perfectly civil about it. But if you forbid certain things that you don't want, these isms and phobias, just as an example, it can make your moderation job a lot easier. There's also the aspect that gaming communities have a tendency to, not just gaming, but just unmoderated online spaces have a tendency to, by default, become horribly sexist, racist, and homophobic and transphobic if you do nothing. So like, you need to be proactive from the start. Assume that things will go bad if you let them, and just make it clear from the beginning that that's not, like, that won't fly in your community. There's also stuff like, some servers or like some communities try to enforce things like no politics, which is always like things like blanket rules like that have a tendency to just give people leeway to consider other people's existence political. So that's just, I mean, that's just rough topics of what sort of thing you wanna have in your community rules. That's not what I'm presenting right here is not a rule set, of course. I'll give you an example for what are actual rules later on. This is just like sort of what should a good community rule set entail. Like, what do you post where is another basic. If there's no channel for it, there may not be a place for it in your community. What isn't off topic, like what sort of discussions do you want to have in your community? You'll at the beginning you'll be relatively open and be relatively tolerant of like what can come up and whatnot. But if you realize, hey, certain topics just lead to issues, you might have to start adding rules like we don't discuss this or that game, or we don't discuss this or that topic, or stuff like that. Like, you need to protect yourself from having to moderate the same discussions over and over. Stuff like off-topic channels generally, or like can also help making the community space a bit more of an organic space. It's like if you keep your focus too tight on just the game, you're likely to or like it's less likely that people hang out just for fun. One super basic type of channel that's just relatively safe is like post a picture of your pet and boom, you have people bonding over their pets. And it's like, it's a bit cheap, but it can, like, it's just one example of things that can work to like get people to engage a bit and to talk a bit. And yeah, of course, real life events and news, depends on what you want to allow, depends on what you want to moderate. We've definitely had like in one or other of the servers I've moderated, we've definitely had to like just say this is not the topic for that server because we don't want to moderate that. So yeah, decide and communicate what you want in your community and what you don't want. Basically, that's what it comes down to. Okay, so now I'm gonna get into the do's and don'ts of it. Sorry, I realize I'm being a bit like I'm talking kind of densely, and my slides are relatively text heavy. So like I'm gonna do another little check-in. Like, is this useful so far? Do you have any questions? Is there anything that like anything confusing or anything that you think is completely missing so far from the discussion? Quick vibe check.
Seems very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes, very clear. All good.
All right. Okay. Then I'll just go on, and you guys let me know if there's anything else. Okay. So, what should you do in your community? You should, of course, enforce your own rules. Again, it sounds basic, but I've been in so many moments where I'm like, where I realized after the fact that it took me too long to actually like take moderator action. So like, if somebody's being rude, maybe they're not explicitly calling someone an asshole, but maybe they're being passive aggressive or anything like that. Like, I've learned that it makes sense to enforce rules sooner rather than later. So like, post a quick reminder, say like, hey, remember this community is about kindness, and we don't talk that way to our fellow community members. It's like, that needs to be enforced, because the moment you don't enforce your rules, they basically don't apply. That also, well, that's also a sort of a learning that I've had to come to. The fast-paced nature of some of these channels, Discord in particular, it can sometimes lead us to believe that, oh no, the moment has passed. Like, okay, somebody was insulting someone 2 hours ago, but they've moved on now, and I don't want to stir things up again. But I've sort of come to the conclusion that it is worth reaching out again. Like, even if you have to DM someone afterwards saying like, hey, this was not okay. In the future, please do not insult others, or like do not do the thing you did wrong. Like, it makes sense to think that stuff through and to act on it, even if the community, like even if the discussion has moved on. Not like a month later, obviously, but we sometimes can. The immediacy of these messaging platforms sometimes creates an impression that like being 2 hours late to a thing means it doesn't apply anymore, but I think that's not the case. If things are moving too fast, you can always just lock channels and like or enforce slowdowns. It's again Discord specific, but like if things are moving too fast and you can't manage it anymore, you need to put the brakes on, and you can. That's why we have those moderator tools. Adjust rules if they're not enough. It would be really interesting to see like the rules I first set up when I started my big horse game community versus the rules we have now, because like every rule specification was born from very stressful situations that led to us having to adjust the rules because we realized, oh wow, this wasn't enough. Someone was able to exploit it, or someone was able to like cause a lot of discontent in the community because we weren't strict enough in our moderation. So also, don't hesitate to adjust. Like the rules are there to make this place pleasant for you, or like useful for you to have the place follow your purpose. And you need to adjust the rules if you realize they're not enough. You also need to lead by example. Of course, you can't go around insulting your own players in your community, or just like generally being rude to people and then expect them to be better. But it's not just not breaking the rules, it's also like defining the tones. Like if somebody new joins your community, and you as the server owner just leave a hi reaction emoji, that's a different thing than if you, for example, write a little hello welcome message to everyone. Or also if somebody posts something and you realize like somebody had a question and it was ignored, for example, maybe you then want to go and actually reply to that and say like, hey, I don't know the answer, but let's get attention to this again. Can anyone help this person? Like just being helpful and being kind, that sort of thing will color the rest of your community. So that will influence how other people react as well, in combination with your rules, of course. So you are basically your community's you're your own community's first member and also its most prominent member, and you need to help define how that community works, how you talk to each other in this space. Yeah, and I mentioned that before already. At some point, if you have a few hundred players, for example, it may not be good enough for you yourselves to keep eyes on it. You may need moderators at some point, and that's something that like nowadays I have about 4 community moderators in a community of about 1,300 people, and it's incredibly helpful. Not just because we can talk things through, like the moderation team, but also because I have people almost all around the world, which means that very likely somebody has eyes on it at all time, and if something goes wrong, they can react very quickly. But that's not something that you need from day one on. Like I said before, if you're late to a conversation because you can't be there 100% of the time, you can still enforce everything. And but yeah, it helps, of course, having a few more people around. All right. Do we have any questions for the do's?
Yeah, maybe for the enforcement of the rules. Like if you see someone harassing someone, or it might be not as clear cut, like do you write them a direct message, or do you answer them like publicly, hey, that was not cool? Like how do you define a point like I'm just gonna kick this member? I think there's in extreme cases that's the easiest, I guess. But I mean, or what are the steps between? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah. So usually when we see something going on right away in that moment, I generally respond in the public channel. So I say like, hey, I'm putting a stop to this. This isn't okay. Something like that. We also like in the biggest, like in the horse game community, that's just the biggest one that I manage. That's why I keep using that as an example. There we also like distinguish our messages. We say like, this is a mod message, and put like 2 distinct emojis at the start, to like make it clear that, hey, this is an instruction and it needs to be followed. That's also part of our. We also have, you need to follow moderator instructions as a rule, because it's not suggestions. If we tell you stop this now, you stop this now, or otherwise you're out. So that's part of it. Like making, just saying it really clearly in that moment. I generally use DMs, like moderation in DMs, for situations where it's not immediately urgent. So like those situations where I come and read up on a conversation and I realize like, hey, this person was being an ass. Then I reach out per DMs like, hey, we've noticed this and this and this, and that wasn't okay. And then, by the way, if I send someone a DM, again, something I've learned, because like it can just be ignored, like people can just not respond to DMs like that. In that case, I attach like, please respond to this message and confirm that you've understood it, and that you're like, and that you'll adhere to our rules in the future. Because if they ignore that, I usually send a reminder. I'm like, hey, please don't ignore this, otherwise it will lead to a ban. Because like if you ignore moderator instructions in a DM as well, that's another rule.
That's not a member you want.
Yeah, and like it's the bar is really low. Like I don't expect someone to answer me that day. I don't expect someone to answer me like I don't know, to give me I don't expect anyone to write a manifesto and like, okay, I will follow the rules to the letter from now on. I hereby swear. Like, no, I just need an acknowledgement. Like, okay, thanks, got it. Like it's the bar is low, so yeah, that's sort of to answer the where do we moderate. It depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the immediacy of it. But I think only in DMs wouldn't be what I recommend, because usually like moderator action is also a way to show the rest of your community that something isn't okay. So like you reach the whole community if you do it in public. So I think there's pros and cons to each of that. And the other thing you asked, like when do we ban people? We tend to ban when something is really, like if somebody is new in the community and does something really egregious, like really, if somebody comes in there and shouts slurs, they're just out because they haven't built up any goodwill. So like, why would we keep those people? Like if you just come in, say no word of welcome, and I don't know, start spouting something that I don't want in the community, you're out. That's it. We have more patience for like regular members, so like people who have posted before. When I say regular, I don't mean just those who post every day. I mean like somebody who just who has proven themselves to be generally like a real person with an interest in the group topic, something like that. And there it's usually like first of all, I discuss it with my fellow moderators, and that really helps. By the way, I would say like try to be at least 2 people as soon as possible. So you, like even if it's just 2 people from your dev team, so you don't have to handle it all alone, to like sort of bounce ideas. So if an established community member starts doing stuff like that, we generally like we give them a warning. We say, hey, this isn't okay for this and this and that reason. Please do this and that in the future. If it happens repeatedly, we sometimes send another warning, and we just get like, you know, the first time it's a request, like, hey, please do it differently, okay, and the second time it's like, hey, if you do this again, you're out, and then if they do it again, they're out, something like that. So I usually try to warn with a ban before I actually ban, unless that person has earned no goodwill whatsoever, in which case I have a lot less hesitation. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
It's a bit, it's really, I try to put so much. I feel like I've learned so much, and I've gotten so much better at this over the course of the past 4 years. Where it's like, my tolerance for people's bullshit has sunk significantly over the time of managing these communities, and it is something that you'll have to get used to. Like I'm trying to convey learnings, but at the same time, you need to get your own, like you need to get your own sense of like, okay, is this person like, what's this person's purpose in coming here, and is that aligned with what I want my community to be? So like I do think it's also something that you learn as you go along. All right, then I'll move on to the don'ts. So don't tolerate insults and rudeness under the guise of giving feedback. That's something that I've had to tell the Wild Shade team a few times. Like they would be like, "Oh no, people don't like it," and I'm like, "Yeah, but if people don't like it, they can say it like in a friendly way. Like we as." And I noticed that as well when my game was released last year, that I had a lot harder time moderating people being rude about my game, because I felt like, oh yeah, but they're right. No, they have a fair point that part of the game is bad. Like, but you have to sort of predefine for yourself what is okay and what is not okay in terms of giving feedbacks. Like, people are always allowed to say that something isn't good, but for example, this is something that, like, these examples are something that I would and wouldn't tolerate. So, like, if somebody tells me this feature is shit, like, why did you idiots think this was good? Like, no, that's not how you voice feedback in my communities. And it's, in part, that's a philosophy. Like, of course you could let people give feedback like that, but I don't think it's productive. I don't think it leads to a useful community. So like I am pretty strict in enforcing, like, you're gonna learn to make I statements, and you're gonna learn to make like to voice criticism instead of just calling things shit. Like I need, that's something that I think is part of like my my bare minimum of what I expect players, like people, to be able to do when they join my community. Like, yeah, I do expect people to be capable of distinguishing between calling something shit and explaining why they dislike a feature. And some people aren't able to do that, and they will be pissed that they're not allowed to do that in your community. But then again, it's like they're not as much used to you, so it's, yeah, I don't think it's bad not to cater to those people. I've already mentioned this, but like, don't allow bigotry and toxicity. Unfortunately, unfortunately, like I said, gaming related spaces especially have this tendency to just turn toxic when left unmoderated, actively prevented. You should also not allow users to redefine your space. I've sort of hinted at that when I said before, like, if somebody wants a channel for, I don't know, if for example you have a game about, you're making a football game, and somebody wants a channel for real life football, like, yeah, maybe that's suited. But if they then say, I want to have a celebrity gossip channel where I can talk about footballers and their spouses, maybe that's where you have to draw the line, or something like that. Like, just whenever somebody asks for a channel, or whenever somebody asks for a rule change, you need to ask yourself, is that still within the purpose of my community, or am I making concessions to fit to someone else's, like, someone else's desires for my community? But no, remember, you're hosting this, you're responsible for this, so you need to enforce your rules and your like, and ensure that your purpose is maintained. That means you can't accommodate every user's wishes. That goes from things like, for example, I've seen people who are like, I've seen people who are like, well, please don't tag me. But I'm like, I need the tagging function in order to moderate. So like, this is now a basic, this is now part of my server rules, and you will be tagged by moderators. This is not something you can opt out on. I'm sorry if that makes you incompatible with the community. There's also things like, for example, in my horse game community, we do have a channel where people are allowed to to vent about their personal lives, and also to ask for like sort of emotional support. But we had to put an explicit like ban on people doing that, to the point where somebody would repeatedly post that they were about to harm themselves, and they were about to like they saw no point in living anymore, and stuff like that. And so I had to actively like adjust the rules to be like, no, this is not a purpose that our community can have. We cannot be a suicide hotline for someone who's struggling. Like, here's resources for that. Like, you can link hotlines or something like that, but it's not something that I can take responsibility for. This is a place. It has a purpose. I'm hosting this because I want to talk about topic X, game Y, whatever. And this can't be part of that. This can't be part of that. And that's hard sometimes, especially in the case I mentioned. Like, if somebody wants your help, or if somebody uses you for support, and that person is obviously not well, we have a tendency to want to help them, but you still need to stick to those to the rules you've set at the beginning of like, why do I build this community? Why do I moderate this? Why do I host this? Because the alternative is to get drawn into a lot of things that you don't actually have capacity for. The other don't is to grow at any cost. Of course, you want growth. Of course, you want to like reach more people with your community, but you also need to remember that quality is more important than quantity. And basically, like, if people break your rules, ban them. You don't need any people at the cost of like of having your rules followed. And generally also that also goes into like, do not buy followers. That's useless. But also just it's more about the quality, more like how people talk, what they talk about. It's not just about getting as many people as possible, because like the value they provide will not be better actually. And don't hesitate to ban people. Like, you don't need rule breaking members. They do not help you. They will just make your life harder. Right. So I talked a lot about Discord so far, because it's sort of the community management trendy thing at the moment. And I also use it a lot, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. This table is a bit it's a bit vague. I based this mostly on like very, very rough impression, and the truth is that the answer to all these combinations, like, is Discord accessible? Does Discord have a higher discussion quality? Is my target audience familiar with it? All of that depends on your target audience, depends on you, depends on your game. There's a few things that are that apply widely. So, for example, indexability is a concern. Like, can posts in the forum, or can community posts be found on Google? Which, for example, is not the case in Discord, and is a pretty big problem with Discord as a whole, just like with its prevalence. Like, there's so much knowledge currently being generated just on Discord servers that will not be findable again. That can be an advantage if of course, if you want to keep things private, do it that way. But for example, a traditional message board or a subreddit can make it easier for people to find things again by just searching for their question. And it also depends on like I said, where does your audience hang out, and what are they interested in? That all depends. And I also added like your own familiarity with the platform. Like, if you already use Discord on a daily basis, you might have an easier time running a Discord server, for example. That's especially the case, I think, with Reddit, which is something that Reddit only works if you already use Reddit, like, because it can be a really strong tool, but that applies to marketing as well. Like, using Reddit as an outsider, if you don't already have an interest in it, is a bit, I would say it's a bit inefficient. All right. Any questions on that? It's like I said, this isn't an exact science, because it really depends on what you need your community for. But I created this table more to just to make you understand that these things have to be considered. So it's a lot more about the columns. Sorry, about the labels of these rows here are more important than what I actually filled in as the results. One thing I can add is like discussion quality. That's something that I notice as a huge difference between my Facebook group with 10,000 people and my Discord server with about 1,300 people. Like on Discord, I can ask a nuanced question, and on Facebook, people just do not read. Even like on Facebook, we get posts where somebody posts about a game, and you have the game title in the post, and still you have 12 comments asking what game is that, because people just do not read. So like I would say like discussion quality, I think is overall higher on like Reddit and Discord than on something like a Facebook group. But then again, it also hugely depends on the moderation. All right. Okay. I realize I'm already an hour in. I still have a few slides left. I'm going to keep the sort of more marketing-y things a little bit shorter, because I think the community was really the focus today, and I also don't want to fry your brains. And generally speaking, like all of these topics are really complex, and it's impossible to like give you everything you need to know about the topics in an hour or an hour and a half. But yeah, just a few basic learnings or like impressions that I would like to give to you. When choosing a marketing platform, so like when deciding which platform do I want to market on, it's always a balance between something that you enjoy and something that is popular. Of course, you should go out of your comfort zone at some point, but you're also allowed to, like, if something, if you're already familiar with something, that can make it a lot easier, and that can make your time invested a lot more efficient. So yeah, do give new platforms a try. Remember that it's better to not be on a platform than to be on it, like just to post something and then never update it again. When choosing a marketing platform, it also depends, of course, on where your target audience is. So, for example, Facebook and TikTok have vastly different age demographics that will be relevant for you, depending on your the target audience for your game. It also depends by topic. Like some hobby niches just have big followings on Facebook or on Insta or on TikTok, and it makes sense to research that beforehand, like before actually starting before actually starting to market. Yeah, age range and interests, and of course just which platforms are popular in general. And yeah, just as a general, I mean, super brief what I'm doing here regards to marketing. I know you've already had a presentation on marketing in this series, but just I wanted to have it said again, like game marketing is part of game development, and you can't just do it like, and the same applies to community building as well. You can't just start that once the game is out, then you're too late. And if you're a small team and you don't want to market, then you need to have someone to find it for you, because games don't sell on their own. But I'm sure Jeremy has already told you that. Right. Just a few basic insights into like, so how do I grow a community? Like the problem with giving an answer to that is that it's hugely tied into like, how do you reach people in general? How do you market a game in general? Because those are like, your reach and your community grow hand in hand, perhaps not exactly the same, but they do rely on each other. So just a few very basic principles here. You'll want to cross promote in other relevant communities. So for example, if I know that a lot of players hang out in a community about a competitor game of mine, it might be relevant for me to post there, like to say like, hey, if you enjoy this game, you might also enjoy that one. But of course, don't be a nuisance about it. Like check the rules of other communities before you post your own community there. You can also encourage existing members to share invitations, but then again, don't just ask them to invite people at any cost. It's still about quality versus quantity. Then you also have perhaps like give incentive to join. So like if people only want to follow your game, they might not have a reason to join your community. So maybe such incentives can be, for example, in our Discord, you get to vote on the next skin we implement, stuff like that. So like that's for example an incentive, like giving people motivation to be part of your community. Or that they get news earlier or something like that could also be, or that they that they maybe get preview builds of the game, stuff like that. There's a lot of options. And yeah, of course, tie it explicitly to the rest of your marketing. So like if you go viral on Twitter, make a second tweet saying like join our Discord. Like it's kind of, again, kind of obvious, kind of basic, but yeah, you do actually need to link your community to your other marketing efforts. And it's also the question, like at some point, maybe early in development, your primary call to action will be join our community. But at some point, your primary call to action will be wishlist our game or buy our game, and sort of consider what is the most important thing you want from players. Maybe at some point, you first tell players to wishlist, and then you have like, oh, by the way, we also have a Discord. But maybe at the beginning, where you don't have, where the game can't be bought or wishlisted yet, maybe the community will be your highest prio as a call to action. Okay. Then I have, so far, I've sort of, I mean, all of this stuff applies to like community management, whether you are a dedicated community manager working with a dev team, or whether you're just a developer who also does community management. But since community management is also a position that sort of often goes forgotten, I wanted to just quickly an overview of like what is, like if you are a dedicated community manager, what that actually entails. I imagine this being relevant either if any of you considers community management as a career, like as a specialization within games, that is an option, or if any of you is like, oh wow, I want to make games, but I do not want to manage communities, and you want to find someone who does it for you. So like it's relevant whichever side of the coin you're on. So as a community manager, as a community manager, you need to know how to resolve conflicts. You need to compile and quantify feedback for the dev team, because you'll get a lot of volume, and a good community manager also sort of like not filters, but just like compiles that into a useful format. And you also protect the dev team from toxicity. So like if somebody starts insulting developers in the Discord server, I consider it the role of the job of a good community manager to not forward that, like because my dev team doesn't gain anything if I tell them, oh wow, somebody showed up today and called you all assholes, can you believe that? Like that's the sort of thing that I'd rather keep away from them, unless they're explicitly interested in it for some reason. And being a community manager is also like kind of about like communicating things that may not always be good news while minimizing frustration. So like combining bad news with good news, sort of communicating mitigating factors, asking for feedback. There's a lot of, it's kind of communicating well is kind of a science unto itself. And as a community manager, you inevitably get kind of good at it, or like you have to get good at it. And of course, also represent the community in the devs, like the community's needs in the dev team. So like if you, a community manager is by definition a lot more involved with what the players want than the dev team itself. So that's also like a chance to sort of be the voice of the community when talking to the developers, because you will be more involved with them than any individual community member. This again applies whether you're an external community manager working together with a dev team, or also if you're just like, if you're wearing the community manager hat as part of your other dev responsibilities. All right. I've reached the end of my slides. These are two super, super useful links that I highly, highly recommend for different reasons. So The Discord Moderator Academy is just basically Discord's instructions on how to run a community. And I've seen so much stuff in there that I read after struggling with the exact same topics and going like, oh my God, if only someone had told me that 2 years ago. Like, I don't know. I felt like it was super useful. They have, there's definitely some overlap with what I've said today, but they have a lot of resources on like how to moderate, how to cultivate communities, how to deal with difficult situations. So I can highly recommend checking that out if you plan on running your own Discord. Or maybe Leah, if you maybe if you haven't checked it out yet, I do recommend it since you're already doing that. Check out other games communities, of course. Just like if you join any games Discord, see what kind of rules they have. Obviously, not every rule set you find will be good, but you'll get impressions and you'll get you'll learn from it. And another really helpful resource is the articles by Victoria Tran. Victoria Tran is a community manager who started out at who worked for a while at KitFox Games and was instrumental in launching a super successful Kickstarter for KitFox, for Boyfriend Dungeon. And she's then moved on to work at Innersloth. So she now manages all the social media channels of the Among Us, of Among Us, which of course was a whole different beast of just like taking over the community for a hugely viral game, but a really small team with sort of not huge resources. So definitely recommend her writings. She also has articles on like how to foster kindness and how to steer the tone with which you interact with your community, like how to steer the tone with which your community interacts with you. So that's super interesting. And she also has articles on like healthily growing a community. So definitely highly recommend that for some further reading. This is not intended to be read through right now. That's just an example, like from one of my Discord servers. This is how I set up the rules for a game-specific Discord server for Wildshade. Might be helpful. You'll get this presentation later on, or I can send you the screenshot separately. Just if you need a baseline, that might be helpful. And that is it. That's about everything I wanted to say. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it wasn't too dense. I know it's kind of, many of these things sound a bit like they often sound a bit obvious when you say them out loud. But from doing this sort of community management for about 4 years now, I can tell you that we lose sight of what is kind of basic and what are those basic purposes. Like we lose sight of that so often. And so I do hope that it helps to have heard all of that at least once in advance. So that once you start creating your own communities, you'll be a bit better equipped and maybe have to learn a little, not quite everything of that from scratch through pain and stress, like I did.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Alice. It was very interesting. Lots of topics you were mentioning that are highly important for our mentees. Are there any questions right now?
I don't know if it's really fixed, but I was wondering what's your opinion on newsletters, because they seem pretty dead and people don't seem less and less inclined to subscribe. But at the same time, it's still sometimes requested as proof of traction, or for example, for backer camps, or they have it as a criteria. So what's your opinion on newsletters?
I have to admit, I don't have a lot of personal experience with newsletters, but I do know that Philomena has written about importance of newsletters to her a few times. So I think probably if you Google Philomena Schwab and newsletters, you'll find some of her writings on the topic. And as far as I know, as far as I know, she's been quite convinced by her own experiences with it, and I have to I have to defer to her experiences because I personally haven't really. I don't have recent experiences with newsletters. I know that from my time at Air Console, I had we did have a newsletter, and we did also keep sending it out. Like, it had the open rate wasn't great, but it was still a channel that we did pursue, at least in the time I was there. I think much like the other marketing platforms, it has its uses. It's not something that should be your only avenue, but it. I do think they're not that entirely. Like, I do think there's still a place for newsletters in a modern marketing world, but yeah, I don't have enough experience with the topic to really answer that in depth.
I guess demographics also matter there, right?
Sorry?
Demographics probably also matter in this case, right?
Yes, they always do. Absolutely.
Any other questions? Luca, you've got the mic open.
Well, no questions, not because I was just here. I'm not the target group here. I was just here as a listener. Nevertheless, thanks a lot, Alice, for your broad knowledge on this topic. And to be honest, I've been in the scene for quite a long time, and nevertheless, I got quite a few bits of information out of your talk that were quite new to me, and which so I learned quite a lot. Thanks a lot. It was really good.
Glad to hear.
It was very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. Glad to hear.
Can you move maybe to the next slide, please, Alice?
Sure. Just really quick before I move on, I did put my Discord here and my email. So, like, if anyone, if you have follow-up questions, I am very much like always happy to help. Also, if you plan on setting up a community and you want me to review your rules beforehand, do reach out. I do generally enjoy forwarding the things I've learned. So do feel free to reach out. All right.
Thank you very much. So if there are no further questions, we will close today's webinar. And as you are all in contact with your mentors, if there are questions coming up after today's webinar, of course, you can contact either your mentor directly, or then, as Alice offered, contacting her. Often after a webinar like this, your head or your brain still works and suddenly other questions arise. And I think it's a very important topic afterwards to be successful with your game, to take this subject serious. And we are happy to having had a specialist today with us. And thank you once again for this great presentation.